Hello, and if this is your first time on my channel, hi. If it's not, welcome back. You know what? First off, this is my bed. I swear to God, I'm not weird. I have a loft bed just because I always, like, whenever I'm even just on call with one of my friends and I have that showing, I get, what is that? It's my bed. I'm not weird. I have a loft bed. I'm not just sitting underneath my normal sized bed. I did that when I was a child when I did have a normal bed, though. Me and my sister used to, like, bring drinks there and just sit. I don't know. I was a weird child. This is not new information. But anyways, I got this book, and it's like a short story book, and I'm gonna butcher the shit out of this. It's Agatha Christie's, however the fuck you say that, short stories. And I love the original series. It's like a thousand books long. Like, that right there on, like, closest is the list of all the books. I think there's like over 50. But also you can read them out of order. Like, I'm totally reading them out of order just based on when I find each one. So that's fun. Also, I look like a hot mess. I performed my show tonight, like my play tonight, so if I see one comment about how I look, I will cry. So just let's not do that. Alrighty. But I'm gonna be reading these because I'm bored. Why not? And I know it's supposed to be, and also you will get my commentary, so have fun. Okay, forward. This is like the backstory of him. Oh, okay, so I'll read this first because I don't even know this shit. Who is, I'm gonna butcher the shit out of the name and I'm not gonna say it. I want to say Hercules, but it's not that. My mom told me the pronunciation of it, and I kind of went, what? And didn't really listen. He was born in Agatha Christie's fertile brain. Wow, really? A refugee from the German invasion of Belgium that brought Britain into World War I. The Great War of 1914 to 1918. Those who could flee the German onslaught did, and as a ranking policeman in the city of Brussels, Poirot, oh, that's wrong, but I know it, might well have been taken up and put in prison. Not the sort of thing Poirot would relish. No scope for zélitul. It's in French, I'm sorry. Gray cells there, and faced with the need to occupy himself, if not to earn a living while his country was in German hands, Poirot fell back to what he did best. Solving crimes. Later he shared lodgings with an ex-officer of that war, Captain Hastings, who later, in a sense, became his Watson, the man who carried the revolver in emergencies and who was the sounding board for theories. Hastings often had theories of his own, but just as often they were red herrings. Poirot's first case was the mysterious affair at Styles. I have that book, haven't read it. Christie made him a ludicrous figure with his short, portly figure and egg-shaped head, his little mannerisms, and the immaculate clothes of a bygone era. But she gave him as incisive a brain as Sherlock Holmes, a man whose mind could cut through the tangle of lies and secrets, and unerringly point to the murderer. Sorry, I'm like butchering half of these words. This was made in the 1940s. And I'm not that old. So there's a lot of words that I could not fucking tell you how to pronounce if my life depended on it. A man who could cut through the tangle of lies and secrets and unerringly point to the murderer. David Schutz portrayed Poirot to perfection in the PBS series, and even Christie's grandson, Matthew Pritchard, wished that she had lived to see his portrayal. Peter Ustinov had taken the role in Death on the Nile, even dancing a very fine tango with one of the characters. Albert Finney had portrayed Poirot in a darker interpretation in Murder on the Orient Express. but it's Suchet who captured not only the outward appearance of the man, but the inner strength and intuitive intelligence that has given Poirot so many years of life and led new generations of readers to discover him on the printed page. Poirot appeared in novels and in a long list of short stories, and it is here in the short stories that the Christie fan and the Poirot of word I don't know, I want to say Afsinadio, and that's that. No, it looks like a Harry Potter spell. I'm gonna skip that word. I'll put it up on the screen, maybe. I don't know how to edit. Never mind. That's a lie. Alike find him at his best. Christie reserved some of her most intriguing plots for Poirot, devising new ways of looking at how and why crimes were committed. Indeed, she gave the mystery drama some of its finest plot twists. You need only look at John Curran's Agatha Christie's Secret Notebooks of Agatha Christie, Murder in the Making, to see how brilliantly Christie's mind worked while creating a story. It's a revelation to watch her fuse characters and plots as she keeps the reader guessing. But that's another tale. Here before us now is a feast of Poirot, of the short stories that made him famous throughout the world for almost 100 years. If you haven't discovered the pompous little man with the marvelously razor-sharp mind, here's your chance. An omnibus, sure, to savor, to dip into when you want something fun to read that keeps you on your toes, spotting clues, to put on your shelf as a collector's item, to carry in your bag for the next flight, or the long commute, or sitting in a doctor's office, or to use as a companion over lunch on a rainy afternoon, or at bedtime when you want to put aside the cares of the world. Poirot is all of this and more. He's the epitome of creativity. He's the legacy of an extraordinary woman writer who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Conan Doyle and give the mystery genre a character as famous and long-standing as Holmes. Even her titles are evocative, often a play on familiar nursery rhymes. Just skim the contents to see the variety, and yet each one is chosen with malice afterthought. Christie does nothing by chance, but the mystery here, aside from the wonderful stories, is Hercule Poirot himself. Christie led us on a merry chase, giving us more about his appearance than his biography. Clues abound, but you must watch for them and eliminate the red herrings Poirot himself deliberately plants about his past. What cases had he already solved by the time he reached England? How old was he? Why did he choose to live in a certain place? Why was he well known to the Belgian royal family? Why had he never married? What was the connection to Captain Hastings? What was Hastings' first name? There was a statue of Poirot in a Belgian town. But was this his birthplace? And look at his clothing. Where did he find the money to live so well, this refugee from war? Poirot himself is an enigma. Here's your chance to get to know him as a person as well as a character. Like Christie herself, Poirot keeps secrets. A brilliant woman who wrote mysteries, a brilliant detective who solves them. A collection of his work and works as well as hers. A gift for friends, a treasure for yourself. Hercule Poirot, the complete short stories, is not to be missed. Leave me alone if I pronounce that wrong, please. If I pronounce any words wrong, just leave me alone. I'll search him up on Google later and I'll figure out the right pronunciation and I'll feel stupid for not knowing it. And you know what? Sounding it out doesn't always work. My fucking kindergarten teacher lied to me. Sounding it out does not work because you have stupid things like I before E except after C. What about the word weird? I always fuck up the word weird because of that damn rule. Who made that rule? It's not correct. Anyways, first short story. The Affair at the Victory Ball. This was originally published in the sketch March 7th, 1923. Pure chance led my friend Hercule Poirot, formerly chief of the Belgian force, to be connected with the Styles case. His success brought him notoriety, and he decided to devote himself to the solving of problems in crime. Having been wounded on the Somme and invalidated out of the army, I finally took up my quarters with him in London. Since I have a first-hand knowledge of most of his cases, it has been suggested to me that I select some of the most interesting and place them on record. I'm doing so. I feel that I cannot do better than begin with that strange tangle which aroused such widespread public interest at the time. I refer to the affair at the Victory Ball. Could not tell you. Although perhaps it is not so fully demonstrative of Poirot's peculiar methods as some of the more obscure cases, its sensational features, the well-known people involved, and the tremendous publicity given to it by the press, make it stand out as a cause of celebration. It's in French, but I know what it means. I'm struggling, y'all. I'm struggling. Not the point. And I have long felt that it is only fitting that Poirot's connection with the case should be given to the world. It was a fine morning in spring, and we were sitting in Poirot's rooms. My little friend, neat and dapper as ever, his egg-shaped head tilted on one side, was delicately applying a new pomade to his mustache. A certain harmless vanity was a characteristic of Poirot's and fell into line with his general love of order and method. The Daily Newsmonger, which I had been reading, had slipped to the floor, and I was deep in a brown study when Poirot's voice recalled me. "Of what are you thinking so deeply, Mon Ami?" A lot of French words in this one. "To tell you the truth," I replied, "I was puzzling over this unaccountable affair at the Victory Ball. The papers were full of it." I tapped the sheet with my finger as I spoke. "Yes? The more one reads of it, the more shrouded in mystery the whole thing becomes." I warmed to my subject. "Who killed Lord Cronshaw? Was Coco Courtenay's death on the same night a mere coincidence? Was it an accident, or did she I'm struggling, y'all. I'm so sorry. Deliberately take an overdose of cocaine?" I stopped and then added dramatically, "These are the questions I ask myself." Poirot, somewhat to my annoyance, did not play up. He was peering into the glass and merely murmured, "Decidedly, this new pomade is a marvel for the mustaches." Catching my eye, however, he added hastily, "Quite so, and how do you reply to your questions?" But before I could answer, the door opened, and our landlady announced Inspector Japp. The Scotland Yard man was an old friend of ours, and we greeted him warmly. "Ah, my good Japp," cried Poirot. "And what brings you to see us?" "Well, Monsieur Poirot," said Japp, seating himself and nodding to me, "I'm on a case that strikes me as being very much in your line, and I came along to know whether you'd care to have a finger in the pie." Poirot had a good opinion of Japp's abilities, though deploring his lamentable lack of method, but I, for one, considered that the detective's highest talent lay in the gentle art of seeking favors under the guise of conferring with them. "It's the Victory Ball," said Japp persuasively. "Come now, you'd like to have a hand in that." Poirot smiled at me. My friend Hastings would, at all events. He was just holding forth on the subject. "Why is there French? I get it, he's probably French, but Christ, I don't know how to speak French." Jesus, who decided that I was gonna... Why am I doing this to myself? "N'est-ce pas, mon ami?" Please, if you're French, don't correct me. I know I'm wrong. Please, I know I'm wrong. Like, shut up, please. "Well, sir," said Japp condescendingly, "you shall be in it too. I can tell you it's something of a feather in your cap to have inside knowledge of a case like this. Well, here's to business. You know the main facts of the case, I suppose, Monsieur Poirot? From the papers only, and the imagination of the journalists is sometimes misleading. Recount the whole story to me." Japp crossed his legs comfortably and began. "As all the world and his wife knows, on Tuesday last a grand Victory Ball was held. Every two-penny halfpenny hop calls itself that nowadays, but this was the real thing, held at Colossus Hall, and all London at it, including your Lord Cronshaw and his party." "His dossier?" interrupted Poirot. "I should say his bioscope. No, how do you call it? Biograph? Viscount Cronshaw was 5th Viscount, 25 years of age, rich, unmarried, and very fond of the theatrical world. There were rumors of his being engaged to Miss Courtney of the Albany Theatre, who was known to her friends as Coco, and who, by all means, a very fascinating young lady. Good. Continue. Lord Cronshaw's party consisted of 6 people. He, himself, his uncle, the Honourable Eustace Bellatane, a pretty American widow, Miss Malaby, a young actor, Chris Davidson, his wife, and last but not least, Miss Coco Courtney. It was a fancy dress ball, as you know, and the Cronshaw party represented the old Italian comedy, whatever that may be. The Commedia dell'Arte. Shut up, I know I butchered that. Murmured Pierrot. I know. Anyway, the costumes were copied from a set of china figures forming part of Eustace Bellatane's collection. Lord Cronshaw was Harley Quinn. Bellatane was Punchinello. I'm sorry. Miss Malaby matched him as Pulcinella. The Davidsons were Pierrot and Pierrette. And Miss Courtenay, of course, was Columbine. Now, quite early in the evening, it was apparent that there was something wrong. Lord Cronshaw was moody and strange in this manner. When the party met together for supper in a small private room engaged by the host, everyone noticed that he and Miss Courtenay were no longer on speaking terms. She had obviously been crying, and seemed on the verge of hysterics. The meal was an uncomfortable one, and as they all left the supper room, she turned to Chris Davidson and requested him audibly to take her home, as she was sick of the ball. The young actor hesitated, glancing at Lord Cronshaw, and finally drew them both back to the supper room. But all his efforts to secure a reconciliation were unavailing, and he accordingly got a taxi and escorted the now weeping Miss Courtenay back to her flat. Although obviously very much upset, she did not confide in him, merely reiterating again and again that she would make old Cronch sorry for this. That is the only hint we have that her death might not have been accidental, and it's precious little to go by. By the time Davidson had quieted her down somewhat, it was too late to return to the Colossus Hall, and Davidson accordingly went straight home to his flat in Chelsea, where his wife arrived shortly afterwards, bearing the news of the terrible tragedy that had occurred after his departure. Lord Cronshaw, it appears, became more and more moody as the ball went on. He kept away from his party, and they hardly saw him during the rest of the evening. It was about 1:30 a.m., just before the grand cotillion, when every one was to unmask, that Captain Digby, a brother officer who knew his disguise, noticed him standing in a box, gazing down on the scene. "Hello, Cronch," he called. "Come down and be sociable. What are you moping about up there like a boiled egg? Come now, there's a good old rag coming on now." "Right," responded Cronshaw. "Wait for me, or I'll never find you in the crowd." He turned and left the box as he spoke. Captain Digby, who had Miss Davidson with him, waited. The minutes passed, but Lord Cronshaw did not appear. Finally, Digby grew impatient. "Does that fellow think we're going to wait for him all night?" he exclaimed. At that moment, Miss Malaby joined them, and they explained the situation. "Say now," cried the pretty widow vivaciously. "He's like a bear with a sore head tonight. Let's go right away and root him out." The search commenced, but met with no success until it occurred to Miss Malaby that he might possibly be found in the room where they had supped about an hour ago. They made their way there. What a sight met their eyes! There was Harley Quinn, sure enough, but stretched on the ground with a table knife in his heart. Japp stopped, and Pierrot nodded, and said with the relish of the specialist, "Une belle affaire." And there was no clue as to the perpetrator of the deed, but how should there be? "Well," continued the inspector, "you know the rest. The tragedy was a double one. Next day there were headlines in all the papers, and a brief statement to the effect that Miss Courtenay, the popular actress, had been discovered dead in her bed, and that her death was due to an overdose of cocaine. Now, was it accidental or suicide?" Her maid, who was called upon to give evidence, admitted that Miss Courtenay was a confirmed taker of the drug, and a verdict of accidental death was returned. Nevertheless, we can't leave the possibility of suicide out of her death. Her death is particularly unfortunate, since it leaves us no clue now to the cause of the quarrel the preceding night. By the way, a small enamel box was found on the dead man. It had Coco written across it in diamonds and was half full of cocaine. It was identified by Miss Courtenay's maid as belonging to her mistress, who nearly always carried it about with her, since it contained her supply of the drug to which she fast became a slave. Was Lord Cronshaw himself addicted to the drug? Very far from it. He held unusually strong views on the subject of dope. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. But since the box was in his possession, he knew that Miss Courtenay took it. Suggestive, that is it not, my good Jap? Ah, said Jap rather vaguely. I smiled. Well, said Jap, that's the case. What do you think of it? You found no clue of any kind that has not been reported. Yes, there was this. Jap took a small object from his pocket and handed it over to Poirot. It was a small pompon of emerald green silk, with some ragged threads hanging from it as though it had been wrenched violently away. We found it in the dead man's head. Hand, which was tightly clenched over it, explained the inspector. Poirot handed it back without any comment and asked, Had Lord Cronshaw any enemies? None that anyone knows of. He seemed a popular young fellow. Who benefits by his death? His uncle, the Honourable Eustace Bellatane, comes into the title and estates. There were one or two suspicious facts up against him. Several people declared that they heard a violent altercation going on in the little supper-room, and that Eustace Bellatane was one of the disputants. You see, the table knife being snatched off the table would fit in with the murder being done in the heat of a quarrel. What does Mr. Bellatane say about the matter? Declares one of the waiters was the worse for liquor, and that he was giving him a dressing-down. Also, that it was nearer to 1 than half past. You see, Captain Digby's evidence fixes the time pretty accurately. Only about 10 minutes elapsed between his speaking to Cronshaw and the finding of the body. And in any case, I suppose, Mr. Bellatane, as Punchinello... I'm sorry, my cats are loud. You probably can't hear them, but I can. I know exactly which one that was. Was wearing a hump and a ruffle. I don't know the exact details of the costume, said Jap, looking curiously at Poirot. And anyway, I don't see what that has got to do with it. No? There was a hint of mockery in Poirot's smile. He continued quietly, his eyes shining with the green light I had learned to recognize so well. There was a curtain in this little supper-room, was there not? Yes, but with a space behind it sufficient to conceal a man. Yes, in fact, there was a small recess, but how you knew about it... You haven't been to that place, have you, Monsieur Poirot? No, my good chap. I supplied the curtain from my brain. Without it, the drama is not reasonable. And always one must be reasonable. But tell me, did they not send for a doctor? At once, of course, but there was nothing to be done. Death must have been instantaneous. Poirot nodded rather impatiently. Yes, I understand. This doctor now, he gave evidence at the inquest? Yes. Did he say nothing out of any unusual symptom? Was there nothing about the appearance of the body which struck him as being abnormal? Jap stared hard at the little man. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know what you're getting at, but he did mention that there was tension and stiffness about the limbs, which he was quite at a loss to account for. Aha, said Poirot. Aha, mon Dieu. Jap, that gives one to think, does it not? I saw that it had certainly not given Jap to think. If you're thinking of poison, monsieur, how on earth would poison a man? Who on earth would poison a man and then stick a knife into him? In truth, that would be ridiculous, agreed Poirot placidly. Now, is there anything you want to see, monsieur? If you'd like to examine the room where the body was found, Poirot waved his hand. Not in the least. You have told me the only thing that interests me. Lord Cronshaw's views on the subject of drug taking. Then there's nothing you want to see? Just one thing. What is that? The set of china figures from which the costumes were copied. Jap stared. Well, you're a funny one. You can manage that for me. Come round to Berkeley Square now, if you like. Mr. Bellatane, or his lordship, as I should say now, won't object. I'm so sorry that this video is turning out longer than I meant it to be. I will probably post one where I'm not as talking as much and just reading the thing. I'm really sorry for this, y'all. We set off at once in a taxi. The new Lord Cronshaw was not happy, but at Jap's request we were shown into the china room where the gems of the collection were kept. Jap looked round him rather helplessly. I don't see how you'll ever find the ones you want, monsieur. But Poirot had already drawn a chair in front of the mantelpiece and was hopping up upon it like a nimble robin. Above the mirror, on a small shelf to themselves, stood 6 china figures. Poirot examined them minutely, making a few comments to us as he did so. Les voilà, the old Italian comedy. 3 pairs, Harlequin and Columbine, Pierrot and Pierrette, very dainty in white and green, and Ponicello and Ponicella in mauve and yellow. Very elaborate, the costume of Ponicello, ruffles and frills, a hump, a high hat, yes, as I thought, very elaborate. He placed the figures carefully and jumped down. Jap looked unsatisfied, but as Poirot had clearly no intention of explaining anything, the detective put the best face he could upon the matter. As we were preparing to leave, the master of the house came in, and Jap performed the necessary introductions. The 6th Viscount Cronshaw was a man of about 50, suave in manner, with a handsome, dissolute face. Evidently an elderly roux with the languid manner of a poseur, which I think means poser. I took an instant dislike to him. He greeted us graciously enough, declaring he had heard great accounts of Poirot's skill and placing himself at our disposal in every way. The police are doing all they can, I know, Poirot said, but I much fear the mystery of my nephew's death will never be cleared up. The whole thing seems utterly mysterious. Poirot was watching him keenly. Your nephew had no enemies that you were aware of. None whatsoever. I am sure of that. He paused and then went on. If there are any questions you would like to ask. Only one. Poirot's voice was serious. The costumes. They were reproduced exactly from your figurines, to the smallest detail. Thank you, Miller. That's Miller. I think that's German or French. That is all I wanted to be sure of. I wish you good day. And what next? Inquired Jap as we hurried down the street. I've got to report at the yard, you know. Bien, I will not detain you. I have one other little matter to attend to, and then... Yes? The case will be complete. What? You don't mean it. You know who killed Lord Cronshaw? Parfaitement. I don't know what that means. I'm so sorry. I will look it up and post it in the description box. I'm so sorry. Who was it? Eustace Bellatane? Ah, Mon Ami, you know my little weakness. Always I have a desire to keep the threads in my own hands up to the last minute. But have no fear, I will reveal all when the time comes. I want no credit. The affair shall be yours on the condition that you permit me to play out the denouement my own way. That's fair enough, said Jap. That is, if the denouement ever comes. But, I say, you are an oyster, aren't you? Poirot smiled. Well, so long. I'm off to the yard. He strode off the street, and Poirot hailed a passing taxi. Where are we going now? I asked in lively curiosity. To Chelsea to see the Davidsons. He gave the address to the driver. What do you think of the new Lord Cronshaw? I asked. What says my good friend Hastings? I distrust him instinctively. You think he is the wicked uncle of the storybooks, eh? Don't you? Me, I think he was the most amiable towards us, said Poirot noncommittally. Because he had his reasons. Poirot looked at me, shook his head sadly, and murmured something that sounded like no method. The Davidsons lived on the 3rd floor of a block of mansion flats. Mr. Davidson was out, we were told, but Miss Davidson was at home. We were ushered into a long, low room with garnished oriental hangings. The air felt close and oppressive, and there was an overpowering fragrance of joss sticks. Miss Davidson came to us almost immediately, a small, fair creature whose fragility would have seemed pathetic and appealing had it not been for the rather shrewd and calculating gleam in her light blue eyes. Pierrot explained our connection with the case, and she shook her head sadly. Poor Cronch, and poor Coco, too. We were both so fond of her, and her death has been a terrible grief on us. What is it you want to ask me? Must I really go over all that dreadful evening again? Oh, madame, believe me, I would not harass your feelings unnecessarily. Indeed, Inspector Japp has told me all that is needful. I only wish to see the costume that you wore to the ball that night. The lady looked somewhat surprised, and Pierrot continued smoothly. You comprehend, madam, that I work on the system of my country. There we always reconstruct the crime. It is possible that I may have an actual representation, and if so, you understand, the costumes would be important. Miss Davidson looked a bit doubtful. I've heard of reconstructing crime, of course, but I didn't know you were so particular about details. But I'll fetch the dress now. She left the room and returned almost immediately with a dainty wisp of white satin and green. Pierrot took it from her and examined it, handing it back with a bow. Merci, madame. I see you have had the misfortune to lose one of your green pom-poms, the one on the shoulder here. Yes, it got torn off at the ball. I picked it up and gave it to poor Lord Cronshaw to keep for me. That was after supper? Yes. Not long before the tragedy, perhaps? A faint look of alarm came onto Miss Davidson's pale eyes, and she replied quickly, Oh, no, long before that. Quite soon after supper, in fact. I see. Well, that is all. I will not derange you any farther. Bonjour, madame. Well, I said as we emerged from the building, that explains the mystery of the green pom-pom. I wonder. Why? What do you mean? You saw me examine the dress, Hastings. Yes. The pom-pom that was missing had not been wrenched off, as the lady said. On the contrary, it had been cut off, my friend. Cut off with scissors. The threads were all quite even. Dear me, I exclaimed. This becomes more and more involved. On the contrary, replied Pierrot placidly. It becomes more and more simple. Pierrot, I cried, one day I shall murder you. Your habit of finding everything perfectly simple is aggravating to the last degree. But when I explain, Mon Ami, is it not always perfectly simple? Yes, that is the annoying part of it. I feel, then, I could have done it myself. And so you could, Hastings, so you could. If you would but take the trouble of arranging your ideas. Without method... Yes, I said hastily, for I knew Pierrot's eloquence when starting on his favorite theme only too well. Tell me, what do we do next? Are you really going to reconstruct the crime? Hardly that. Shall we say that the drama is over, but that I propose to add a harlequinade? The following Tuesday was fixed upon by Pierrot as the day for this mysterious performance. The preparations greatly intrigued me. A white screen was erected at one side of the room, flanked by heavy curtains at either side. A man with some lighting apparatus arrived next, and finally a group of members of the theatrical profession who disappeared into Pierrot's bedroom, which had been rigged up as a temporary dressing room. Shortly before 8, Japp arrived, in no very cheerful mood. I gathered that the detective hardly approved of Pierrot's plan. Bit melodramatic, like all his ideas. But there, it can do no harm, and as he said... It might save us a good bit of trouble. He's been very smart over the case. I was on the same scent myself, of course. I felt instinctively that Japp was straining the truth here. But there, I promised to let him play the thing out on his own. Ah, here is the crowd. His lordship arrived first, escorting Miss Mallaby, who I had not as yet seen. She was a pretty dark-haired woman, and appeared perceptibly nervous. The Davidsons followed. Chris Davidson also I saw for the first time. He was handsome enough in a rather obvious style, tall and dark, with the easy grace of the actor. Pierrot had arranged seats for the party facing the screen. This was illuminated by a bright light. Pierrot switched out the other lights so that the room was in darkness except for the screen. Pierrot's voice rose out of the gloom. Messieurs, mesdames, a word of explanation. 6 figures in turn will pass across the screen. They are familiar to you. Pierrot and Pierrette, Ponticello, the buffoon, an elegant Pulcinella. I'm so sorry. Beautiful Columbine, lightly dancing, Harley Quinn, the sprite invisible to man. With these words of introduction, the show began. In turn, each figure that Pierrot had mentioned bounded before the screen, stayed there, a moment poised, and then vanished. The light went up, and a sigh of relief went around. Everyone had been nervous, fearing they knew not what. It seemed to me that the proceedings had gone singularly flat. If the criminal was among us, and Pierrot expected him to break down at the mere sight of a familiar figure, their device had failed signally, as it was almost bound to do. Pierrot, however, appeared not a whit discomposed. He stepped forward, beaming. Now, monsieurs, mesdames, will you be so good as to tell me, one at a time, what it is that we have just seen? Will you begin, my lord? The gentleman looked rather puzzled. I'm afraid I don't quite understand. Just tell me what we have been seeing. I should say we have seen 6 figures passing in front of the screen, and dressed to represent the personages of the old Italian comedy, or ourselves on the other night? Never mind the other night, my lord, broke in Pierrot. The first part of your speech was what I wanted. Madame, you agree with Miller Cronshaw? He had turned as he spoke to Miss Malaby. Yes, of course. You agree that you have seen 6 figures representing the Italian comedy? Why, certainly. Monsieur Davidson, you too? Yes. Madame? Yes. Hastings, Jap, yes. You are all in accord. He looked around upon us. His face grew rather pale, and his eyes were green as any cat's. And yet you are all wrong. Your eyes have lied to you, as they lied to you on the night of the Victory Ball. To see things with your eyes, as they say, is not always to see the truth. One must see with the eyes of the mind. One must employ the little cells of grey. Know then that tonight, and on the night of the Victory Ball, you saw not 6 figures, but 5. See? The lights went out again. A figure bounded in front of the screen. Pierrot! Who is that? Demanded Pierrot. Is it Pierrot? Yes, we all cried. Look again. With a swift movement, the man divested himself of his loose Pierrot garb. There in the limelight stood glittering Harley Quinn. At the same moment there was a cry and an overturned chair. Curse you! Snarled Davidson's voice. Curse you! How did you guess? Then came the clink of handcuffs and Jap's calm official voice. I arrest you, Christopher Davidson, charge of murdering Viscount Cronshaw. Anything you say will be used in evidence against you. Which I guess is like the older version of Miranda rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you. It was a quarter of an hour later. A little supper had appeared, and Pierrot, beaming all over his face, was dispensing hospitality and answering our eager questions. It was all very simple. The circumstances in which the green pom-pom was found suggested at once that it had been torn from the costume of the murderer. I dismissed Pierrot from my mind, since it takes considerable strength to drive a knife table home, and fixed upon Pierrot as the criminal. But Pierrot left the ball nearly 2 hours before the murder was committed, so he must have returned to the ball later to kill Lord Cronshaw, or he must have killed him before he left. Was that impossible? Who had seen Lord Cronshaw after supper that evening? Only Miss Davidson, whose statement I suspected was a deliberate fabrication, uttered with the object of accounting for the missing pom-pom, which, of course, she cut off from her own dress to replace the one missing in her husband's costume. But then, Harley Quinn, who was seen in the box at 1:30, must have been an impersonation, for a moment earlier I had considered the possibility of Mr. Bellatane being the guilty party. But with his elaborate costume, it was clearly impossible that he could have doubled the roles of Punicello and Harley Quinn. On the other hand, Davidson, a young man of about the same height as the murdered man, and an actor by profession, the thing was simplicity himself. But one thing worried me. Surely a doctor could not fail to perceive the difference between a man who had been dead 2 hours ago and one who had been dead 10 minutes. Eh bien, the doctor did perceive it, but he was not taken to the body and asked, how long has this man been dead? On the contrary, he was informed that the man had been seen alive 10 minutes ago, and so he merely commented at the inquest on the abnormal stiffening of the limbs, for which he was quite unable to account. All was now marching Famously for my theory, Davidson had killed Lord Cronshaw immediately after supper, when, as you remember, he was seen to draw him back into the supper room. Then he departed with Miss Courtenay, left her at the door of her flat instead of going in and trying to pacify her, as he affirmed, and returned post-haste to the Colossal. But as Harley Quinn, not Poirot. A simple transformation effected by removing his outer costume. The uncle of the dead man leaned forward, his eyes perplexed. But if so, he must have come to the ball prepared to kill his victim. What earthly motive could he have had? The motive, that's what I can't get. There we come to the second tragedy, that of Miss Courtenay. There was one simple point which everyone overlooked. Miss Courtenay died of cocaine poisoning, but her supply of the drug was in the enamel box which was found on Lord Cronshaw's body. Where, then, did she obtain the overdose which killed her? Only one person could have supplied her with it, Davidson, and that explains everything. It accounts for her friendship with the Davidsons, and her demand that Davidson should enter her home, or escort her home. Lord Cronshaw, who was almost fantastically opposed to drug taking, discovered that she was addicted to cocaine and suspected that Davidson supplied her with it. Davidson doubtlessly denied this, but Lord Cronshaw, determined to get the truth from Miss Courtenay at the ball. He could forgive the wretched girl, but he could certainly have no mercy on the man who made a living by trafficking in drugs. Exposure and ruin confronted Davidson. He went to the ball determined that Cronshaw's silence must be obtained at any cost. Was Coco's death an accident, then? I suspect that it was an accident cleverly engineered by Davidson. She was furiously angry with Cronshaw, first for his reproaches, and secondly for taking her cocaine from her. Davidson supplied her with more, and probably suggested her augmenting the dose as a defiance to old Cronch. One other thing. The recess and the curtain, how did you know about them? Why, Mon Ami, that was the most simple of them all. Waiters had been in and out of that little room, so obviously the body could not have been lying where it was found on the floor. There must be some place in the room where it could be hidden. I deduced a curtain and a recess behind it. Davidson dragged the body there, and later, after drawing attention to himself in the box, he dragged it out again before leaving the hall. It was one of his best moves. He is a clever fellow. But in Poirot's green eyes I read unmistakably the unspoken remark, but not quite so clever as Hercule Poirot. Alrighty, that was it. That was the first story. There is about more than 50 short stories in this book, so I will probably be reading one a day-ish, and I promise you it will not take that much time in the other ones, and I'll most likely even repost this one where it is not as much commentary from me and more just the straight up short story for anyone who wants to use it as, oh, that sounds cool, or just, I want to go to sleep, whatever. For any reason, you can use it without hearing my voice constantly inputting my opinion. Bye. Love y'all.